Hi and welcome to this video. In this video, I want to spend a few minutes talking about negative emotions. And I emphasize the word negative because negative, just like with positive, is an assessment. It's a judgment, it's an opinion. It's just an idea that we have about things that we experience. Now, the perspective that I'm going to share with you regarding negative emotions is a perspective that comes from coaching, from ontological coaching to be more specific. And the idea is this: you and I are unique observers of the world, and you and I are going to interpret everything that we experience, every situation, every event, and very definitely every conversation that we get into. And this is going to have an impact on that unique observer that we are. And so when we experience emotions, we are going to interpret that emotion. We're going to have a story around that emotion. We're going to even create a story if no other stories are forthcoming. And these stories, they create and build upon that framework of belief that our unique observer has. And that framework of belief is going to lend itself into that range of possible actions that we're going to undertake in that situation, event, or conversation based upon those emotions that we experience. And this is where I want you to consider that an emotion is an energy. It has a force within it to cause you to take action. And that action that you're going to take is going to produce certain kinds of outcomes. It's going to produce certain kind of results. And the invitation here is for you to consider it's not so much the emotions themselves that are negative, but rather the outcomes, the results of those emotions that are either negative or positive or mixed, depending on how we assess and how we interpret the results, the outcomes from those actions that we take. And with that, I want to introduce you once again to Dr. Robert Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions. And I like using this slide a lot, actually, because number one, we can work with a limited vocabulary of emotions right off the bat, because at its very basic, there are only 4 different emotion pairs. And then if we want to, we can create more interest and add to each of these basic emotions and their expressions. So we get a few more different distinctions of that kind of particular type of emotion. So the invitation with this Wheel of Emotions and this video is to identify for yourself. Take a few moments out and pause this video if you need to, or make it full screen if you need to, and identify for yourself which of these emotions you would generally label and generally assess to be negative or positive or mixed. And just take a few moments to do that. And once you've done that, I want to ask you, why is it that you consider those emotions to be negative or positive or even mixed? And the invitation once again is to consider the possibility that it's not so much the emotion itself that is negative or positive or mixed, but the actions that are undertaken while experiencing those emotions and their subsequent results, their subsequent outcomes, are what is assessed to be negative, positive, or mixed. So let's go back and take a look at that Wheel of Emotions again. And as an example, let's take that emotion of anger. Anger, I think, is a very misunderstood emotion. And that's because most of the anger that we see in mainstream media, on movies and TV shows, even music, is very, very destructive, or at least has that potential for great violence. And when anger is expressed in this way, that is to say, the energy of that emotion of anger, when it's undertaken in actions expressed in this particular way, when it becomes destructive, that's when we get damage to property, damage to other people, damage to the psyche of that individual undertaking those actions, and very generally, it's destructive. But I invite you to consider how it can be that that emotion, that energy within that emotion of anger, how can you imagine a scenario where that is taken and acted upon to create outcomes that are assessed to be more positive than they would if they were destructive. And one example that comes to me is that of Nelson Mandela. And I want you to imagine just for a few moments that anger, that rage that Nelson Mandela must have felt at that injustice that was being meted out, that was being served to his people, that institutionalized racism, that segregation, that apartheid. How would that make you feel if you were in Nelson Mandela's shoes? How would you direct that energy of that potentially negative emotion of anger? How would you have done it? Well, chances are likely that earlier expressions of Nelson Mandela's anger and even rage caused him to take actions that created some sort of damage to property, to people, to political ideas and things like that. But those actions resulted in him being thrown in jail for 20 plus years. And while in jail, I don't doubt for a moment that his anger left him. In fact, externally, he was prevented from using that energy of anger and directed in a destructive way. So the only way that it could be directed, that energy, was to go inside and to change his perceptions, to change his ideas, so that he was able to effect some sort of political change, create an outcome that was, in the end, more positive without that destructive capacity. And this is what I invite you to consider. Each of these emotions, and in that example was that emotion of anger, but every single one of these emotions has an energy, and that energy is going to be expressed in ways that make sense to you, that make sense to me, as the unique observers that we are in the world. And the way that you and I express those energies of those emotions can lead to actions that can be assessed as being positive or negative or even mixed. And so I want to invite you to notice what shows up for you when I share this perspective of negative emotions with you. How does understanding that emotions have at their core an energy that requires an expression? How does that shift your thinking about emotions in general, or even about negative emotions? What is the takeaway for you now that you know about the energies of these emotions? How is it that you are going to utilize the energy of supposedly negative emotions or even positive emotions and take action that will enable you to create outcomes, to create results that have meaning, that have value, and that are satisfactory for you? And I think this is at the core of what makes for a full life, for a fulfilled life, for a satisfied life, and ultimately a happy life. And that is when you understand that emotions at their core, positive emotions or even negative emotions, have that energy that lend themselves to possibilities for action that when acted upon will generate that result. But it's entirely up to you to harness that energy and to take actions that will create that hoped for outcome, that will create that desired result that you want in your life. I hope this video has been helpful to you to understand how you can make use of those so-called negative emotions and those so-called positive emotions even, and harness that energy behind that emotion and use it to take action to create an outcome that has meaning, value, and satisfaction to you. Because in the end, it's the results that are positive, it's the results themselves that become negative, and it's the results themselves that make up our life. So once again, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to post below. I will be there to answer each and every single one of your questions. Before you go, I want to introduce you to a couple of my courses, and you can find the direct links to these two courses in the description box below, and you will get them at a very special discounted price right there. These two courses are about intelligent anger management and also learning to identify the stories behind your emotions so that you can declare happiness and satisfaction with all of the outcomes and the results in your life. This intelligent anger management course is 2.5 hours long with 41 different lectures that you can use to take control and harness the energy of the emotion of anger. In the course, Learning How to Master Emotions, Declaring Happiness and Satisfaction in Life, this is a very comprehensive course with 4.5 hours of content and 64 lectures. In these two courses, you're going to get video lectures, you're going to get PDF worksheets and other PDF documentation that will help you to take control of all of the energies within emotions for yourself and understand the stories behind them so that you can learn what range of possible actions become possibilities in your life. And when you take those actions that will create that desired outcome in your life, then you are able to take control of all of those conversations, all of those situations and events to declare satisfaction and ultimately happiness with those outcomes and those results in your life. So once again, you can check out the description box below for direct links to these two courses at a very, very special price. So take care of yourself, have a beautiful day, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye for now.